The Hanging Wedgie. Taylor, a young woman with a playful spirit, found her grandfather's dusty winch in the attic. It was a relic from his construction days, and she saw it as a perfect tool for a practical joke. She dusted the winch off and tested its crank, finding it working smoothly. An idea sparked in her mind involving her overalls and the winch. A hanging wedgie would be a hilarious prank. She carefully attached the shoulder straps of her overalls to the winch's hook. Her heart pounded with anticipation as she took a deep breath and began to turn the crank. The overalls began to rise, hoisting her off the ground. She let out a surprised yelp, her joke turning into reality. She was hanging by her overalls in the attic. After her initial shock wore off, she tried to release herself. However, the winch was locked in place, leaving her stuck, swaying slightly in the attic's cool air. Panic began to set in. She had expected a quick laugh, not a prolonged hanging. She wriggled and squirmed, but the winch held firm. Taylor tried to reach the winch's crank, but it was just out of her grasp. She was stuck, and help was not immediately available. Her phone was downstairs, and she was alone in the house. She tried to calm herself, thinking of ways to escape her self-made predicament. She remembered seeing a broom in the corner of the attic. But it was just out of her reach. She started to swing herself gently towards it. After a few minutes of swinging, she was able to grab the broom. But now she had to figure out how to use it to free herself. She tried to use the broom to unlock the winch, but it was too tricky. The broom was not fine enough to manipulate the small lock mechanism. Desperate, she decided to try to break the overall straps. She sawed at them with the broom handle, but the sturdy fabric held. Hours passed, and Taylor's attempts to free herself proved futile. She was tired, hungry, and her predicament was no longer amusing. As the sun set, the temperature in the attic began to drop. Taylor wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm. Her situation was growing dire. Suddenly, she heard the front door open. Relief washed over her as she recognized her roommate's voice. Help had finally arrived. "Help!" Taylor shouted, her voice echoing through the quiet house. She heard her roommate gasp and then footsteps rushing towards the attic. Her roommate burst into the attic, eyes wide with shock at the sight of Taylor hanging from the winch. "Taylor! What happened?" she exclaimed. "I tried to prank myself and it went horribly wrong," Taylor explained, embarrassed. Her roommate stifled a laugh, rushing to her aid. Her roommate managed to unlock the winch and slowly lowered Taylor to the ground. Taylor sighed in relief as her feet touched the floor. "That was a close one," her roommate said, trying to lighten the mood. Taylor nodded, rubbing her sore shoulders. "Lesson learned," she mumbled. They both laughed at the absurdity of the situation. Despite the discomfort and fear, Taylor couldn't help but see the humor in her self-made predicament. Later that night, they shared the story with their friends over a video call. Their laughter filled the house, bringing warmth back into the cold attic. The next day, Taylor and her roommate decided to pack up the winch and store it away. It had served its purpose and was no longer needed. Taylor's prank had gone horribly wrong, but it had brought them a hilarious memory. They agreed to leave the pranks to the professionals from then on. The hanging wedgie became a running joke in their house. Every time they saw a pair of overalls, they would burst into laughter, remembering Taylor's misadventure. Taylor had learned her lesson. She realized the importance of thinking things through before acting on them. No more self-pranks in the future. In the end, Taylor's hanging wedgie was a comical reminder of how a simple joke could turn into a tricky situation. A story she would never forget. She promised herself to be more careful with her pranks. The winch was safely packed away, and her overalls were hung back in the closet, a silent memento of her misadventure. She could not predict what was in store for her in the future, but one thing was sure, she would never look at overalls the same way again. From that day on, every time Taylor saw a winch or a pair of overalls, she remembered her hanging wedgie. It was a constant reminder of her hilarious mistake. Taylor's hanging wedgie became a legend among their friends. Her story served as a reminder that sometimes, things don't go as planned, and that's okay. Taylor's misadventure had taught her a valuable lesson. It made her realize that the best pranks are those that can be laughed at, not those that leave you hanging. As for her overalls, they became her lucky charm. Every time she wore them, she was reminded of her resilience and her ability to find humor in challenging situations. Taylor's story of the hanging wedgie remained a testament to her adventurous spirit and sense of humor. A memory that would bring a smile to her face for years to come. In the end, Taylor's hanging wedgie was not just a practical joke gone wrong. It was a story of resilience, learning, and finding humor in the unexpected.